In this lesson, we're going to be talking about image files, or more specifically, going to be talking about graphics files. So graphics files are files where pictures or other types of images are stored, and they come in a lot of different formats. We're going to look at some of the popular ones today. And the reason for doing that is because you can't always rely on being able to quickly and easily find graphics files just by looking for a particular file extension. So some of the popular file extensions, I've got some here. So we've got JPEGs and PNGs and GIFs and bitmaps or BMP files. So those are some of the really popular ones that you'll run across. Now, I could pretty easily just change one of these to, like, I'm going to move this one here to XYZ. Now, it doesn't look like an image file anymore, and yet the information that makes it an image file is still all completely intact, and I could open it up as an image file, and nothing would actually change about that other than I've just changed the file extension. The other thing is, if you are just looking across a hard drive and just looking at raw data, you may be looking for places where images used to exist and maybe have been deleted. So you're really looking for a space in the hard drive where you can identify a graphics file maybe used to be, and you want to be able to pull that data out so that you can actually look at it and see what it was. So just because you've deleted a file doesn't mean that the data on the disk actually goes away. It just means it's no longer in the file system anymore. And by file system, I mean the hierarchy of file names and directories. All of that information doesn't necessarily categorize all of the data that really exists physically on the disk. It's just the information that the operating system is currently aware of and can access for you. But once you've pulled a disk image, there's still a lot of space on that hard drive where additional data may live. So let me move this back. Actually, I'm not going to move it back yet. Let's do this here. I'm going to pop this open in a hex editor. And I'm going to show you just the top of the file where you can see how it's identified as a graphics file. Now, all of this is hexadecimal. It's because I've opened it up in a hex editor or a hexadecimal editor. And this is really helpful where you've got binary data and you want to be able to look specifically at what's in that binary data. So if I were to just try to bring this up in a utility that is going to show me text, so in this case, I'm going to use less. And it says it's a binary file, though I want to see it anyway. And you can see it's just kind of garbage there. So a hex editor will actually break it down in a way that it's easier to see. Now, the important part here is the very top of the right-hand column or the right-handmost column, and you'll see there's a bunch of dots, and those dots indicate that those are characters that can't be rendered. So we don't have an ASCII equivalent that is actually printable for that. So what it does is it just puts a dot there. You'll also get a dot in cases where it's just a null. So you see a lot of zeros there, and those zeros would just be rendered as dots as well. But you can see here after the first half dozen or so dots, it says JFIF. And that JFIF is an indicator that this is a JPEG file. So if you see a file or a place on the disk that says JFIF, there's a good chance that what you've got there is a JPEG. And of course, the fact that it says Photoshop 3.0 really doesn't hurt either. It actually says Pixelmator as well. So there's some information in here stored in metadata that gives you some other clues about how the image was created, and there may be some other information in the metadata that may be useful as well. So we can just scroll down through here, and eventually we'll get to a place where it's really just the image, and that's kind of where we are now. So this is going to look like garbage to you. and that's because this is really the image data. But the top of the file has a lot of metadata that may be useful. And again, the JFIF or JFIF at the top of the file is really an indicator that you've got a JPEG on your hands. So similarly, let's take a look at the PNG. And actually, let me just move this back. And you can see changing the file extension really didn't do anything. I've still got the same file there. And now the JPEG extension indicates to me that it is actually a JPEG. And if I open it up in the hex editor, I can verify that it is actually a JPEG file. So let's take a look at the PNG file now. You can see at the top of this file, it says PNG. And there's no better indicator there that you've got a PNG file. It says PNG right at the very top. And there's some additional metadata there. You can see there's some header information, and then we move into the data portion. And I'm going to go to the very end here. PNG actually breaks down nicely because it's got different segments in the file, and the segments are actually designated pretty clearly. You can see at the very end of the file it says end. That indicates that that's the end of the image data, and so it's really the end of the file there. And you can see there's just a couple of characters beyond at the end portion of this particular file. So a PNG file, once again, if we go to the very top, you will see that the PNG file, regardless of its file extension, the indicator for having a PNG file is that some of the very first characters in the file actually say PNG. So right there you can see it says PNG right at the very top of the file. So that's a PNG file. Now let's take a look at the GIF file, or the graphical image format file. And you'll see at the top there it says GIF89. And again, GIF indicates that it's a GIF file. So this is pretty clearly a GIF file. And you may see other different variations on this, but it's going to be pretty clear at the top that you've got a GIF file because it's probably going to say GIF89 or something similar to that. So that's a good indication that you've got a GIF file on your hands when the very first characters say GIF89. And finally, let's take a look at the BMP file. And that actually starts out saying BM8, and then we've got a whole bunch of zeros there. That would be an indicator that you've actually got a BMP file on your hands by what it says at the very top. And this is less structured than some of the others, or less obviously structured than some of the others. You know, like for example, the PNG, where all of the different segments were clearly indicated, the BMP isn't quite like that. So that's just some of the image file types. Of course, there are other image file types like TIFF and some others, for example, but these are the pretty common ones that you're going to run across, particularly if you're looking for images that have been downloaded off the web. You're primarily going to see JPEGs and PNGs. Sometimes you'll see GIFs and BMPs, but primarily you're going to be looking at JPEGs and PNGs for images that have been downloaded off the web. And often those are the types of things that you're going to be most concerned about. So that's how you would go about identifying those files, regardless of what the file extension was. You would be able to identify those files based on what's actually in the header information or at the very top of the file. It's going to give you an indication that the data that follows is graphical data and you've got a graphics file on your hands.